He was turned away from a party, humiliated for his red Maga hat, which symbolized everything the neighbors believed didn't belong in their world. Thomas, the host, decided that James was not the kind of person who should be part of his circle. But what he didn't know was that he had just turned away the mayor of the town, and his actions would soon lead to a real disaster for him. Who then would stand for justice? James Clark, the mayor of the town, was in the mood for a relaxing evening. He had just finished a long, tense meeting with investors discussing a new project for the city, and now he just wanted to unwind. His plan was to spend a quiet evening visiting some neighbors who had recently invited him to a small gathering. On his way to Thomas's house, he tried to shake off the stress of the past few days and set his mind on enjoying the evening. The Maga hat, always sitting comfortably on James's head, was hard to ignore. For him, it was more than just an accessory. It was a symbol of his beliefs, something he was ready to wear in any situation. He knew it could provoke different reactions, but he was used to it and wasn't about to change his views for anyone's comfort. As he pulled up to Thomas's house, he could hear the music, laughter and chatter from the open windows, the usual party atmosphere. James thought this might be just what he needed to relax and recharge. When he reached the door, Thomas himself greeted him. It was immediately clear that Thomas wasn't in a good mood. The mix of irritation and surprise on his face was obvious when his eyes landed on James's red Maga hat. "Are you out of your mind? You can't come in here wearing that hat," Thomas yelled, making no effort to hide his displeasure. The guests around them began whispering, sneaking glances at James, and even laughing quietly. James, boiling inside but trying to remain calm, attempted to explain. "I just came to hang out with the neighbors. I'm not trying to start anything. Don't worry." He knew that getting into an argument would be pointless, but Thomas wasn't backing down. "You think I'm going to let you ruin the vibe? No way. I don't want people like you in my house," Thomas almost shouted, gesturing toward the door. James felt his chest tighten with frustration. He knew this wasn't really about his views or the hat. It was about principles, and Thomas simply didn't want him there. Didn't want people like him there. In front of all the guests, who continued to gossip and laugh behind his back, James felt the sting of humiliation slowly creeping in. He stood there, trying to keep his composure, but Thomas's words felt like a knife. "If you don't take off the hat, you're not coming in," Thomas said again, certain he was in the right. James paused for a moment, but then simply turned and walked away, despite the ache inside. He didn't want to make a scene, but something inside him snapped. That evening became a sign to him that sometimes people will judge you based only on your appearance. As he walked away, he felt the shame growing in every part of him. But that pain wouldn't go away. He knew he had to do something about it. Back at home, James couldn't shake the feeling of indignation and unfairness. Thomas's actions weren't just an insult. They were an attack on the very core of how people saw him because of his political beliefs. It was blatant discrimination, and James wasn't going to ignore it. He understood that if he didn't defend his honor, others would continue thinking it was okay to humiliate people based on their beliefs. He decided to reach out to an old friend, the town's vice mayor, with whom he had often discussed such issues. During their phone call, James detailed the incident, and his friend suggested a simple yet effective way to respond. "Show him who you really are. Don't leave him in the dark. Show your strength," said the vice mayor, hinting at the power James could wield if he chose to use his position. After thinking it over, James's decision became clear. He wasn't going to be just a quiet mayor sitting in his office. He would show Thomas that he wasn't just a man with political opinions. He was the mayor of the town, and his respect wasn't something that could just be taken away. A few days later, James returned to Thomas's house. This time, he was dressed in his usual suit, the one he wore for public events, and of course, his Maga hat. It wasn't about seeking revenge. It was a gesture of self-respect, a kind of counter-move. As he approached the house, he was already expected. This time, Thomas wasn't so friendly, and as soon as he saw the hat, he started shouting, "Are you out of your mind?" James, maintaining his composure, calmly replied, "I'm the mayor of this town, and I think you owe me an apology for your behavior. All your guests can hear you insult me right on your doorstep." Thomas's face turned pale with shock. He didn't expect the guy in the red hat to be the mayor. The brief moment of shock on his face quickly shifted to anger. He immediately tried to call the police to remove the intruder. James only smiled and added, "Go ahead, they'll be here soon, and then they'll find out I'm not someone you can just throw out." Thomas hesitated. The guests, who had begun whispering amongst themselves, no longer looked at him with the same respect they had before. The pressure from the crowd grew so intense that Thomas realized the situation was spiraling out of control. Despite his rage, he knew he couldn't push it too far. In the end, Thomas surrendered. He tried to offer a handshake to James, but James only tilted his head in disdain. The atmosphere of the evening changed. People started discussing the incident, and someone even picked up their phone to post pictures and videos on social media. But for James, none of that mattered. What was important was that he didn't remain in the shadows. And so, the evening ended not as Thomas had expected. As the story of the incident spread and became more widely known, James could feel the public perception of him shifting. The next day, news of the conflict between James and his neighbor Thomas spread across local media. The article in the evening news quickly became the talk of the town. Headlines were loud, and social media was flooded with comments. "Neighbor denies mayor access to party over Maga hat, the pursuit of political purity at their doorstep." Most of the comments supported James, but there were also some defending Thomas, claiming it was his house, and he had every right to decide who could come in. But in reality, things weren't that simple. Many people started to question just how much we judge each other based on appearance and political beliefs. Was it so terrible that James was turned away just because of his choice of symbolism, or was it simply the neighbor's right to control who he invited? Thomas continued to deny doing anything wrong. In an interview with local television, he argued that he was being reasonable and didn't want anyone causing division at the party. He even emphasized that it was a private event, and nobody had the right to tell him who to invite. But it was clear that his position was weakening, especially considering how little Thomas had known about James before kicking him out. James decided to take matters into his own hands and speak directly to the public. He agreed to give an interview on local television, where he openly discussed what had happened and highlighted the importance of fighting prejudice. He not only reaffirmed his role as mayor, but also pointed out how often people make decisions about others based purely on their appearance and political views, without knowing anything about their character or accomplishments. "I showed up as a neighbor who just wanted to share a moment with you, not as the mayor or as a supporter of any political party. But to Tom and his guests, I became someone who had to be rejected. This isn't just humiliation. This is a case where people decide who we are based on preconceived notions of what we truly stand for," James said, staring directly at the camera. But James didn't stop there. He revealed another crucial detail. His political role was only a part of his life. James was not only the mayor, but also a successful businessman. He had been behind several major projects, including investments in infrastructure and creating new jobs in the town. Despite his political affiliation, his work was about improving the whole community. Now his plans were becoming even more ambitious. James announced a new public project aimed at bringing people with different political views together. He suggested creating a series of meetings where citizens, regardless of their party preferences, could gather to discuss important issues, engage in dialogue, and find common ground. "This is a project that will prove we can work and live together, even if we don't agree on everything, but still respect each other," James concluded in the interview. His words resonated so deeply that even his staunchest critics began to consider the real value in his proposal. Respect, dialogue, and striving for the common good were what truly mattered most. When news of James's success as both a prominent businessman and the city's mayor became widely known, Tom suddenly found himself at the center of attention, but not in the way he had expected. The townspeople, who had once been part of his social circle, began to turn on him. Many of them started demanding public apologies and acknowledgement of his wrongdoing. The party Tom had thrown quickly became the subject of intense discussion, and not in the context he had hoped for. Guests started leaving, exchanging glances and whispering, criticizing the host's behavior. Behind his back, people actively discussed his actions and began to question whether it was worth continuing their relationship with someone like him. The negative attention intensified, and soon Tom himself could feel his social status rapidly crumbling. The entire town began to scrutinize his treatment of James, and the initial support he had from those who shared his views began to fade. People started to realize that beneath Tom's outward position was an anger that could have far-reaching consequences. Meanwhile, James continued his efforts to bring people together. He not only supported projects that united supporters from different political parties, but also promoted ideas of social justice and respect, regardless of political preferences. A wave of support for his initiatives began to spread throughout the city. Local business owners, civic activists, and even those who had previously not supported James now looked at his work with respect and a willingness to collaborate. As for Tom, he soon realized that his actions had backfired in a much more significant way than he had anticipated. His prejudice had cost him both his reputation and his respect, and the escalating public backlash only worsened the situation. At the climax of the story, James organizes a public gathering where he emphasizes the importance of unity, understanding, and respect. Tom himself attends, not expecting such a turn of events. He finds himself at a crossroads, either publicly apologize or face the consequences of his hatred and bias. In front of everyone, James, holding back a smile, turns to Tom and says, "We all work for the good of the city, but we need to learn to work together, despite our differences. I'm offering you the chance to be part of this process." This public offer becomes the final blow to Tom's pride. Tom, having lost face, quietly leaves the event. The attendees notice that his departure is more than just a retreat. It's a moment when he realizes that his bias has cost him far more than he had imagined. In the end, James returns home. He takes off his Maga hat but doesn't feel any loss. On the contrary, he understands that true strength lies not in symbols, but in respect and fairness. A new era begins in his city, an era where a person's worth is defined by their actions, not the political symbols they wear.